So I'm going to start working with the Kyler rig from Josh Sobel, and you can use any free rig for this exercise, but I'm going to start off by creating my initial pose, and I'm going to be using just the move tool by pressing W on my keyboard and moving different parts of her body around, and using the rotate tool by pressing E on the keyboard and moving the limbs into position. Most of the time these will be the only two controls that I use. And rarely will I use scale, which Kayla does have some scale properties which can be used, and also she has some custom properties as well to give shape to her eyebrows and her lips, and those can be found in the channel box. Layout wise in Maya, I will always have a camera which is on the left hand side, which is like the point of view of the character, but I'll also be having another view with perspective as well, where I'll be looking around, and I'll always be favoring the pose from the camera point of view, but I will be spinning around in the perspective view on the right and checking that things make sense in 3D space as well. And I'll vary that throughout the exercise, but most of the time I'm going to be posing from the perspective camera and checking things from the final shot camera on the left-hand side. So we're going to start off by building a key pose. In traditional animation, a key is what animators call a storytelling pose. Some people refer to them as golden poses or attitude drawings, but regardless of what they're called, the purpose of a key is to show the audience clearly what is happening in the shot. They tend to be the strongest storytelling poses that you would have inside of a shot, and normally they're very clearly showing out the character's emotional state or the action that he or she is trying to perform. In this case, I have Kayla talking angrily to somebody on the right side of screen, and I'm going to use that as the beat to define all of the elements that I design for this pose. Now in 3D animation, people tend to get confused with the fact that Maya has keyframes as a term for any state we save on the timeline, and we have this animation term which is a key. While animators will want to categorize the different keyframes into different groups from the Maya timeline, we are mostly defining them in terms of if the keyframe is a key, an extreme, a breakdown, or an in-between. We'll learn more about these categories in future lessons, but just so that you know that there are ways that animators can describe to one another of what is the function of the specific keyframe that they have on their timeline. Now, the way that I tend to work when I'm designing one of my key poses is that I tend to work in a quick pass, just going from the hips, posing the legs, working my way up the spine, and then out through the arms. And I'll very quickly pose things like the face and the fingers in very rough positions to start off with. I tend to find that with this rough pass, I can very quickly see what's wrong with my pose, and I can spend time actually fixing the things that I see wrong to make sure that she's angry and complaining to somebody. In my second pass, I'll go over the body again and try to work on the curves of the spine, pose the fingers in interesting and different positions, and work on the facial expressions as well, so that they're a bit more custom and they've got a nice sense of flow to them. Now, animating is a sequential art form, and just like storyboarding or comics, we're going to try and tell a story with the minimum number of poses possible. As a rule of thumb, I'd always recommend that in a shot you should always focus on having 2 or 3 keys, as this will improve the readability of the animation and give us a clearer sense of the action. Throughout this tutorial, you're going to hear me again and again referring down to simplifying things and improving the clarity of the poses. And this attention to detail is really what makes great animation stand out. As an animator, you're constantly looking at body mechanics and different types of acting beats that you put into your work, and it's important to have that level of detail put in even at this basic time when we're planning out a shot by creating these key poses. Now, the face is the last thing that I tend to pose when I'm creating my keys, and that's because the face is really expressive and it's very much a distraction for me from what the rest of the body is doing, and I want the body language and the face language to read at the same time. The face is a really malleable part of the body. It squeezes and it stretches, and we should move every aspect of the face as well. Move the eyelids, move the cheeks, move the nose. It's almost as if the face was made of rubber and we kind of like have to add that little bit of attention to the curves and the detail that we see across the different shapes of the mouth or the position of the eyes. So when we finish posing, it's a good time to evaluate how successful our pose has been just by looking at it from all angles in the 3D viewport. Now, my final pro tip is that you should never be afraid when you're creating poses to look at reference. This can be a photo reference or it can be video reference from YouTube or animated films, but I really recommend you guys to build yourself a Pinterest board with a lot of drawings and poses and illustrations which show characters in a whole range of different emotions and different interesting poses. You should build up a visual library about what different emotions and actions actually look like, so you've got something that you can refer to constantly. And it's not cheating to use reference. Observation is a key aspect of what an animator does, and just like an illustrator builds an interesting pose, an animator will create interesting actions off what they observe.